Hello, and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. My name is Ben Nielsen, I'm the librarian, and today we're talking about a brief introduction to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote many things in his life. Today we're focusing in on the Middle-earth writings that were published during his lifetime and the Silmarillion, which was published after his death by his son Christopher Tolkien. Now, there's been a lot of other books published after Tolkien's death, but we're going to focus in on these 5 books because they are kind of the most well-known and the most critical for you to understand as you're embarking on your Tolkien journey. Okay, first, let's talk about The Hobbit. The Hobbit is a children's book. It's written for children.
For children?
That was the intention of it, and it kicks off the entire thing because it's the first one that's published, and it becomes very popular. So understanding The Hobbit going into it is that it is a book for children, and it's not on the same level as The Lord of the Rings. If you read The Lord of the Rings first and then you come to The Hobbit, it's going to seem very juvenile to you. Another thing to understand is that The Hobbit covers a period of just over a year, and it's this long, right? Whereas The Lord of the Rings is this long, and it covers also a period of, just over a year there for the main content of the book. There's other parts like the 17 years of waiting, but the main content of the book is going to cover just over a year of time. And so you can see that you're going to get a lot more detail and a lot more going on here as you cover this time frame. So, The Hobbit written
for children?
The Lord of the Rings written as a sequel to The Hobbit initially, but obviously evolved into something much bigger. So when you begin in the Fellowship of the Ring, it's going to seem more juvenile than when you end at the end of The Return of the King. That's just something to know going into it and understanding. So The Lord of the Rings, 3 books, right? Actually 6 books. These were written as 6 different volumes. Each of these published books actually contains 2 books that are untitled. They're just called Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, Book 5, Book 6. And so that's where you get the division. And that's where some people stumble because particularly once you get into the 2 towers, you end up with a big division between books 3 and 4 because book 3 follows the adventures of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, and then book 4 really delves into the adventures of Frodo and Sam on their way to Mordor. But it's important to understand that those are different volumes, and so you shouldn't expect the same things from them. So you have 6 books, and there's a lot being covered there, and they're very detailed, and they are amazing. I absolutely love them. The other thing to know is that The Return of the King is actually much shorter than the other 2 books because even though it looks very similar in size, it contains all of the appendices. So there's a whole lot of this material that's not part of the main story. I'll just show you where that starts here in my copy. The book ends right here. So this part, story. This part, appendices. So you get to the end of the story and you're like, wow, there's still a lot to read. And that's actually a great feeling because you hate finishing The Lord of the Rings. Just too amazing. So, Tolkien published all 4 of these during his lifetime. The other one is the Silmarillion. This was the one Tolkien actually worked on his entire life. He started this way before he started writing The Hobbit. And initially, they weren't even taking place in the same universe, but his mythology in the Silmarillion crept into everything that he did. And so this book is much more difficult to read. Some people will come along and they'll be like, you should read these books in chronological order, starting with the Silmarillion and then reading The Hobbit after that. That doesn't make any sense because this book is so much harder to read. Please don't start with the Silmarillion if this is your first time reading. Start with The Hobbit. The Hobbit's going to be much easier and be a good lead-in. You really need to get invested in Tolkien before you start caring enough to delve into the Silmarillion. Remember, this was not published during his lifetime, so it's not necessarily the way that he would have put it together in published form. Christopher Tolkien, his son, put it together, for which we'll be forever grateful. But it's not an easy read, and it's not a story in the same way that these other ones are stories. This one is much more of a mythology, a collection of tales. And where this book covers about a year's time frame, this book covers thousands upon thousands of years time frame. So if you look at the size, Silmarillion's bigger, but not that much bigger. So the amount of detail that you're going to get is so much less, right? You're covering huge swaths of history here. There are some great stories here, but they can be difficult to read. So don't start with it. Start with The Hobbit, then read The Lord of the Rings, then read the Silmarillion. It's almost always better to read an author's works in published order than in chronological order. It just makes more sense because that's where the author's mind was coming from. You see this especially in the Chronicles of Narnia. The Chronicles of Narnia were reordered for the American audience to be in chronological order, and they just don't make much sense that way. They make a whole lot more sense if you read them in the order that C.S. Lewis published them. So I feel the same way about Tolkien's works. Read The Hobbit first, then The Lord of the Rings, then the Silmarillion. So that's just a brief introduction to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien that were published in his lifetime or shortly thereafter that deal with Middle-earth. If you have any questions about this, please drop them in the comments below, and I'm happy to do my best to go ahead and answer those. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.